Thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of this team, the big team of the HumGov project, and to have this opportunity to present one of my chapter or paper of my thesis. This is the fourth chapter of my thesis. The topic is on sexual exploitation and abuse in humanitarian sector, implication of humanitarian workers in Democratic Republic of Congo. So as he already said, I'm from DRC, I'm from Congo, but I'm doing my PhD here at ISS. And this is agenda of my presentation for today's topic. I'm going to present a little bit about the context, then the methodology that I used. Then I was going to define what is sexual exploitation and abuse, or CA, in the humanitarian sector. Then I will present the motivations before presenting the findings, then the final remarks. But I need to start with this testimony or sent. I met one lady in Uvira, and she said, I was about to cry or to shout when the man jumped on me in his office. But when I remembered family members who depend on me, my reputation, and so on, I was like, let me do it. He will not take it away from me. We did it. A few weeks later, I realized that I got pregnant. He left me with something I did not plan or I did not want. Finally, I decided to have abortion. And she finished by saying, I hate man. This is the kind of story some people cannot believe it. But that lady was sharing the story of what the situation she passed through with a leader of a section or an agency in humanitarian sector in Congo. The lady is from a local organization and she applied for funding, but she got an appointment with the manager of this agency or a UN agency, and she went there. But before the guy accepting to sign the contract, she obliged her to have sex. She tried to refuse, but the guy jumped on her. That is where she wanted even to cry, but she couldn't because she's supporting family members with her job and so on. Then she said, let me do it. And after she got this pregnancy. So for those who don't know DRC, our country where I'm from is under ongoing conflict, which started after the genocide in Rwanda. And now it has been like 2.5 million of IDPs in the country and around 1 million refugees in neighboring countries and so on, making it like the first country with a huge number of IDP in the world, followed by Syria and so on. And now it's other countries. So despite this number of IDPs in the country, the government is not able or is unwilling to assist IDPs within the country. Many humanitarian actors or international organizations and local organizations, now they are on the ground to assist affected communities. We have more than 3,000 organizations in Congo. We also have the UN mission there called MONUSCO. All of these people, they are working to assist affected communities, but the situation is not improving. So they come or they organize their work to help affected communities. But in some cases, they fell in this trap or they are involved in sexual exploitation and abuse with affected communities so that the latter may have access to humanitarian aids and so on. Some organizations that started to fight this phenomenon, they put in place accountability mechanism where affected communities can report or humanitarian actors can go to the community to tell them about what is happening in this sector and so on. So the question I ask in this research is how accountability mechanisms help affected communities to fight sexual exploitation and abuse in humanitarian sector. But what is sexual exploitation and abuse? I'm going to define this, but before I define it, I want to present the methodologies that I used to interact with these people, because it was not easy. I'm coming from DRC, I'm known in the humanitarian sector, and it was not easy for me to get information from affected communities, especially that ladies, women who are victims of sexual exploitation and abuse. So what I did, we started here reading theory on on accountability. I didn't even plan to do this kind of research in sexual exploitation, but my research is focused on accountability. But when I went to the field, I was interacting with people. I recorded many cases of sexual exploitation abuse. So I said, I have to do something. And this is how I started doing this research. So after reading theories here, I went to the field. I identified 25 people who are members of Humanitarian Observatory. So with these people, we conducted some interviews, and these interviews led me to have the clear picture of humanitarian governance in Congo. And after that, I organized field missions to the field where I conducted storytelling sessions. I also conducted interviews. But before leaving the field, I organized some community meeting, to talk with people to present my findings or the result from the ground. And based on this based on their comments, because the purpose of this meeting was to present the funding to the community, to research participants, to have a clear idea if I really understand quite well what they said. And if there are some contradictions, this was an opportunity for them to correct. After that, I came and I present this work to Humanitarian Observatory again, before I started writing. So what is sexual exploitation and abuse? Sexual exploitation and abuse, I take the definition from UN's General Secretary in one of the documents that it's called in French circulaire, that he said any actual or attempted abuse of position of vulnerability differential power or trust for sexual purpose, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from the sexual exploitation of another. And sexual abuse is like actual or threatened physical intrusion of sexual nature, whether by force or under unequal or coercive conditions. So these two definitions, they're coming from this document from General Secretary, and they have this politic called zero politic against CA. So if a humanitarian actor is captured or is reported to be involved in sexual exploitation and abuse, is fired from the organization. But what happens if it's like in a country where the government does not have this willingness or this capacity to punish this kind of people, like a fragile state like DRC? So I will present the situation, but let me talk about the motivation. What push people who are involved in the humanitarian sector to have this kind of problems or to have to oblige sex with affected communities and so on? First, I found out that there is an issue of vulnerability. Many IDPs, they come from their villages. They don't have anything. They are like in a camp, or other are in hosting families. They don't have any livelihood. So they're very vulnerable. So when someone like suggests or propose them something, they don't have any option. They don't have alternatives, no option to say no. They just accept for them to leave. There is an issue of like, some people may say like there is consent, but the kind of vulnerabilities they are facing, they are not even able to give a right consent. So second motivation is about social norms. From the childhood in DRC, in Africa culture, men are taught, are trained to become dominant over women. We have many cultures that encourage men to become aggressive. I remember one story my grandpa told me. The only days that I had to fight with my wife, it was when my grandbrother, he obliged me to go, like to beat my wife, to show the community that I'm strong, I am a man. So from the childhood, from some culture, this domination, this aggressivity is like equality. So they do it freely. They feel like if you have to be a man, you have to dominate your wife, you have to do this and that and that. Another thing is about there is a legal gap. You know, sexual exploitation, sexual relation with someone and who is over 18 years in DRC is not punished. It's not bad. It's accepted. But how when someone who is manager is dealing this with a staff member that he's supervising? Because you can get a consent when you're two people with the same position or you are all adult and so on. But when it become like someone is vulnerable and another one has a strong position, a higher position, this is the kind of consent they give. Sometimes it's motivated with something. And this is what happened. The government is not able to punish this kind of people because first, there is this impunity because the system is not strong to punish this kind of people. So this happened, and some people, they take it like normal. So what kind of sexual exploitation and abuse I identified? There is like 5 patterns in DRC of sexual exploitation and abuse. The first one is sexual exploitation and abuse of aid recipients. We have aid. If you want to get to the list, to be listed like beneficiary, you need to have sex with humanitarian actors. And because they don't have any option, some women, ladies, they accept to sell their family members. Second is the sexual exploitation and abuse of job applicants. They want to get a job, but they don't have like skills or, many women in Africa, the level of education is lower. So for them to get position, higher position and so on, they're obliged sometimes to have sex. I don't say we don't have women who are able to work or to do something, but they are few. So for those who are not able, they're exploited for them to get good position. So you have a junior position, you want to get another position. So some managers are obliged, or to get in to be hired in an organization, they oblige this kind of relation. So sexual exploitation for funding. This is the third, funding. This happens more often for local organization with UN agencies or international organizations. They have funding and they are looking for local organizations that can implement this small project. So they oblige sexual relation in exchange to the funding. If you want your organization to be funded, you have to accept relation with me. The fourth pattern of sexual exploitation is humanitarian colleague within an organization, higher position and lower position. The second one was to get in organization. You want to get to be hired in an organization. You have sexual you are obliged to have this sexual relation. The fourth is one you have a position. You are already in organization, but you have a junior position and you want to be a manager, for example. You are obliged to have this sexual relation. And the last one is about forced sex with domestic workers. And this happens in offices, NGOs, guest house, or even the room. They hire people to work in their house, but after I want to increase your salary, for example, you need to have a sexual relation with me and so on. This is the kind of thing they do. So what are the consequences? Consequences, they are at 3 levels. On survivor, like on person, on program that humanitarian actor or implement in the country, program and project, and the last one on humanitarian sector in general. For the first one, after this kind of relation, this kind of exploitation, survivors, they feel like shame. Some of them, they don't even go to report this because they feel shame. Second, we have these children born as a result of CA. She didn't plan, she get pregnant. I visited one organization in Uvira, for example. They are supporting 117 children born as a result of sexual exploitation and abuse. And all of this, most of them, they are born from Congolese people and also expatriate people coming from outside. The third consequence is we have this community rejection. You are rejected from the community. Some of them, they are even abandoned by their husband. After discovering that she had a relation with that man, the man decided, it's over, I will not take you in marriage and so on. Yet this psychological impact and so on. On program level, we have lack of qualification. Someone who was hired because she had sexual relation with the manager. It doesn't depend on capacity. So the kind of work that she will be doing is like this. And she will not have respect to other managers because she knows that I was hired here by your chief, for example, your manager, you cannot say anything to me. And I had one case in Beni of a manager complaining. They don't accept my orientation because they were hired by the manager, our chief, for example. And the last is in humanitarian sector is a reputation of humanitarian sector in general. In some region, people know that humanitarian sectors, these people, they claim they're coming here to assist us. But when you ask questions to people, what did Ebola left you in Beni? They will try saying, they left us with Kamara, they left us with Peter and so on. These are the children. They left us with children, they don't even say they helped people to defeat Ebola, but they remember this kind of thing they did. You know, one bad things can destroy all things that they did. They did a good job, but because of these children they left there, this is like the only souvenir they left in Beni. There is also impact on trust. They don't trust in humanitarian actors. So for those organizations who started fighting this phenomenon, they put in place some accountability mechanism. And we have these hotline numbers, suggestion box, PCA focal point in some organizations. They have the department called PCA. Other, they have this email address. And MONUSCO, for example, the UN mission, they have created what they call community-based complaint network. And other humanitarian agencies, they created community-based complaint mechanism. These are like the community leaders. They are together and they form this group to do community awareness, to mobilize people on prevention against CA. But when I went to the field, what I found is that for phone number, for example, Congolese, in Congo, 56% of Congolese have phones. And of those with phones, only 46% are women. It means that 54% they don't have phones, they cannot use phone to report this kind of act. Second, there is poor trust in existing mechanism. Of 20 survivors I interviewed, 65% are not aware of existing accountability mechanism. They don't know how to report their cases when there is like a case of CA. Of those who are aware of accountability mechanism, 40% they expressed the concern about trust. They said, yes, I know this mechanism exists, but I cannot use it. I don't trust in them. So the key findings from this research is that vulnerability or CA, sexual exploitation and abuse, happen in a context that victims do not have any other option. The only option they have is to accept. Second, CA is linked to social norm and poor knowledge. Men trying to become dominant. CA is seen like normal. So there is also another finding is that CA is amplified by power imbalance. For example, in organization, we have manager and staff at lower position, cleaners and so on, especially women who are not educated, they get this low position. There is also power imbalance between aid workers and vulnerable affected communities. And the last one is about accountability mechanism. They're shaped by context, by local context, but not enough to tackle the problem. The key message from this article is that fighting the problem from the roots may be like a solution. We need to fight this problem from the root causes. And this, how we can do it is like raising community awareness and promoting this positive masculinity. It means that to involve everyone, to train people, or to conduct this awareness so that people may know, may understand, may know this is CA and how to avoid it. And the last one is to increase trust by involving affected communities, representative in humanitarian actions, and create separate accountability unity. Because in some organizations, we found that people who are involved in program implementation, there are also people who are involved in accountability mechanism or in complaint management. And this does not help victims to report their cases because they know if I report this to that organization, the guy is the one who will be in charge of it. So they avoid. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I take time more than what was planned, but thank you. I finished.
Thank you, Delu, for that very interesting and informative presentation. I would like to now invite Dr. Karen Astrid Ziegman to provide a reflection to link what Delu has been talking about to some wider themes. Thank you, Karen, for your thoughts.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Tom and all the HumGov team. And thanks to you, Delu, for providing this very important input. Thought-provoking as well. It's a super important issue and one that has obviously motivated the research that I'm involved in the Listener Age project on understanding transactional sex in humanitarian context, something that Dorothea is also involved in. Maybe starting from the end, I really agree with some of your forward-looking conclusions, Delu, looking at root causes of the types of abuses that you've sketched in quite a moving way, including addressing toxic masculinities, the need for creating and strengthening accountability mechanisms. But sort of, I guess I was not invited to comment just to say I agree with what you said, but also to reflect and provide some alternative perspectives. And for that, I would like to first highlight something that I've learned from the research that we're doing in the Listener Age project, namely the diversity of experiences and types of people who are experiencing the types of abuses that you have sketched. Sort of abuses by actors in the humanitarian sector, where people have to provide sexual services of different kinds in order to gain employment or access benefits that they're entitled to, is also something that we have seen in the 3 project countries, which include DRC, but also Colombia and Pakistan. And interestingly, from DRC, I remember an example that the project coordinator mentioned is actually an experience of sexual exploitation and abuse, to use the term, where the person involved was an employer in a humanitarian organization. She was a woman, if I remember correctly, collaborating with her husband and sort of in a systematic manner, exploiting young employees. And I'm flagging that example without going into details to flag, sort of to encourage us to think out of the types of sexualities, the types of gender relations that undergird your presentation and probably your research. Something that we found in all 3 countries is that the people who abuse may be men, they may be of other genders as well. The people who are coerced to provide sexual services or do provide sexual services, maybe women, maybe of other genders. They may fit into a heterosexual matrix or not. And these comments about the identities of the people involved raise questions about whether the framework of sexual exploitation and abuse is actually a useful one. You can raise questions about who is actually deciding, who is telling a story of abuse or victimhood. Is that the people who feel they've been abused themselves, or is it us as researchers? Is it a humanitarian actor who decides about that, let's say, potential victimhood based on predefined ideas about what the gender and sexual identities, but also other identities, nationality, religion, could be different factors at play here, deciding based on such predefined identities who could be a potential victim. I think this is important against the backdrop of these complications that I just mentioned. Another question is then sort of who decides about the labels of victim or survivor. Is it us as researchers? Is it humanitarian actors? Or is it people themselves who choose how they want to be framed and what types of needs and demands they have based on their experiences? And that links back to your conclusion again, Delu, underlining that community involvement is crucial. Participatory approaches emic perspective, people's own perspective are crucial. And even community might be too broad an umbrella here, because communities are structured by similar power hierarchies as the humanitarian actors that you focus on. So further unpacking of community and these power relations are important. So these are a few preliminary comments, but I would like to set one step back and talk a bit about the conceptual history of the term sexual exploitation in order to raise question marks about its usefulness. Probably all of you are familiar with sort of the Marxian roots of the term exploitation, where it has pretty much a descriptive function. It's not about a normative evaluation, but it's about the worker or workers who have been deprived of surplus value to which they have contributed through their labor. So not being paid what their sort of the goods or services they have contributed to are worth is exploitation. And then sort of during the recent decades, there have been sort of activist uses which do have a moral value. Of course, they're sort of in the Marxian sort of movement or Marxist movement, labor movement, there's also sort of a condemnation of that type of theft of surplus value, but it's descriptive in its origin. But the more activist use of it, which is value laden, is about denigrating circumstances of a person who provides, sort of who produces goods, who provides services. And here you see sort of a split after the labor movement has used the term exploitation in this a sort of normative sense. From the 70s, to my knowledge, onwards, the feminist movement has reappropriated the term exploitation related to forms of patriarchal oppression, which during recent decades has sort of informed international policy frameworks. I don't know all of them. I'm more familiar with those around labor, but also human trafficking, where you see a distinction between sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. The sexual exploitation one defined in rather vague manner in the way that you presented, Delu, and labor exploitation being seen sort of as at the place of work. And this is something that has been problematized a lot because it has led to a sort of a conceptual creep, which basically labels all forms of sexuality where monetary compensation, or which is takes place in outside the private sphere, is labeled sexual exploitation. And obviously the first who critiqued that type of conceptual creep have been sex workers whose sexual practices are actually there to support their livelihood security, but they usually don't consider these practices in themselves as exploitative, but particular circumstances around it. For example, if people sort of make use of their services and do not pay them, but that's wage theft, and in that sense, sort of the ordinary sort of exploitation, even in the Marxian sense. So I'm flagging this history because it shows some of the potential problems once this conceptual creep moves into a policy sphere, because it might further aggravate the stigmatization and marginalization, sort of economic and social, of groups who are quite weak anyway. It might reinforce stigmatization of sexuality in general, and obviously of non-normative sexual practices in particular. So that's sort of these are a few conceptual notes, then leading to maybe some methodological and policy implications, but maybe two learnings from colleagues in Pakistan, the research that has been ongoing there, and colleagues in Colombia. Sort of looking at some of the interviews that were conducted in this Listen Age project in Pakistan, I found it very interesting to see that the term exploitation, I wouldn't know which Urdu, Pashto, or Dari term was used there, but I see the English translation as exploitation. People are referring to their experience in transactional sex as exploitation, but from the context, they actually refer to things. Their outrage about the fact that they have provided something that they consider, something very precious. They have given something very precious, and definitely under different forms of coercion, and particularly in their situation as refugees or IDPs. But they're outraged because they're not being paid properly for these very precious services. They might be able to pay the rent for 1 week based on the payment for transactional sex, but not more. And then another meaning that I see in those interviews is the outrage about the abuse of their vulnerability. Why I'm saying that is I have not seen, and I have not done a detailed analysis of all the interviews as yet, but I have not seen the equation of the types of sexual practices that we've looked at with rape that many conversations around sexual exploitation and abuse assume or make. And one learning from our colleagues in Colombia, a meeting that took place very recently, is their assistance, colleagues who have embodied experience in transactional sex themselves, who insisted that these experiences vary enormously, and for similar experiences, different people involved in these practices of transactional sex might choose different labels. One might talk about rape, all might talk about different forms of coercion. Others might refer to securing their livelihood, something that they demand respect for. So this emic perspective, I think, is something that is very important to keep in mind. Also, once one moves into the policy sphere, and a few reflections on that, and then I'll stop. Similar to what you said, Delu, I think it is crucial for mid and long-term engagement of humanitarian actors with the types of abuses that you have sketched, is to look into the structural reasons for them. And they relate to toxic masculinities, patriarchal power relations, but they go beyond and intersect with others. They relate to class-based oppression, power hierarchies in organizations, in humanitarian organizations. They relate to sexual hierarchies, gender hierarchies, So taking these root causes and the overall livelihood insecurity in humanitarian context on board is sort of the long-term thing. But that does not answer your quest for, right? I mean, the important quest for what are accountability solutions or contributions to that in the sort of short term in humanitarian organizations. And I think there too, engaging with power hierarchies, striving for flat organizational hierarchies, participatory approaches, collective decision-making, sort of for people who take decisions within the organization. That is one important learning or step. The other from the side of beneficiaries who potentially face abuse are effective grievance mechanisms for those, for example, who are employees and face these types of exploitative relationships with superiors, but also rights-based approaches for potential beneficiaries of humanitarian interventions. These are some reflections which are complementary, I think, to what you said. And I'm looking forward to ideas that other people come up with. Apologies for taking longer than expected. And thanks again, Delu, for your great input and for giving me the opportunity to think with you.